what if I told you that Lanterns isn't actually about solving a murder mystery in the American heartland? It's actually about inheritance. It's actually about the institutional rot of the Guardians of the Universe, the weaponization of fear, and the slow motion collapse of the Green Lantern mythos itself. The closer we look at the breadcrumbs DC is dropping, the more it becomes super clear that this series is executing the ultimate origin story for the next massive cosmic catastrophe of the DCU. And I think I've cracked it to an extent. The dual timeline and aging Hal Jordan, the highly unorthodox recruitment of John Stewart, and the cold shadow of Sinestro, they all point toward one devastating conclusion. This show is a prologue to Parallax. So, welcome to the Loreverse, and today we are talking about how I think I figured out Lanterns and how this is all leading to something crazy in the future. So when James Gunn announced Lanterns as a true detective style mystery, a lot of people assumed we were just getting a grounded street level cop show with green rings. But you have to look at the creative DNA behind this. You have Chris Mundy from Ozark, Damon Lindelof from Watchmen, and the comic mastermind Tom King. These guys don't just do simple. They do structural, psychological, and deeply flawed character studies. This isn't a show about a couple of space cops finding a body in the woods. This is an exploration of generational trauma across the cosmos. What you guys need to think about is, number one, the 10-year gap, the mechanics of a compromised ring, and the terrifying reality that the greatest threat to the DCU isn't an alien invasion, but the greatest threat is actually the man wearing the ring. So the first massive clue to how deep this rabbit hole goes is the structural decision to split the narrative between two distinct eras. One is 2016, the other is 2026. And that 10-year gulf is not a gimmick. In the language of prestige television, a dual timeline is used to show a crime in the past and the absolute devastation of its fallout in the present. And so something catastrophic occurs in 2016 that the Guardians of the Universe immediately try to bury. And by the time we pivot to 2026, the entire landscape of Earth's cosmic defense has shifted. We aren't just watching a mystery unfold. We're actually watching John Stewart retrace the steps of a cold case that fundamentally broke his mentor a decade prior. And it now implies that the truth was so dangerous, it took 10 years for the cracks in the universe to finally show. The narrative catalyst is a shooting in Rushville, Nebraska. It's a small town, isolated and surrounded by nothing but cornfields and sky. But the second Hal Jordan touches down, he realizes the local authorities are completely out of their depth. He doesn't see just a boring homicide. He recognizes a extraterrestrial signature. And Sheriff Carey represents the classic civilian perspective, looking for footprints. But Hal is looking for alien stuff. The fact that Hal immediately clocks this as an off-world threat tells us he has already been operating in the deep black of space for years. He knows what happens when cosmic violence bleeds into the ordinary world, and the lack of conventional evidence does suggest a cover-up utilizing technology or energy that operates completely outside of human comprehension. Potentially the highly unstable, volatile signature of the yellow light of fear. Now, we have to talk about the real wild card of the series, though, John Stewart, because in standard Green Lantern lore, the ring is a sentient piece of Owen engineering that seeks out candidates based on pure automated scanning for the ability to overcome great fear. But the intelligence we have on Lanterns indicates something far more deliberate and unnatural. Now, the Guardians of the Universe personally intervened in John's selection. They bypassed the standard operating procedures of the central power battery. And the reason why they might do this in the show is because the Guardians are ancient, cold, and calculating. They don't just break their own rules unless the system itself is compromised. John isn't just the next guy in line. He's an intentional intervention. And this is where the theory takes a dark turn. The Guardians didn't select John because Earth needed extra protection. They selected him because they realized that their golden boy Hal was beginning to fracture. Now, the Owens are notorious for treating their lanterns like tools rather than soldiers. They saw the psychological degradation taking rot in Hal. They saw his paranoia, his isolation, and his obsession. John Stewart wasn't recruited to be Hal's partner. He was recruited to be his contingency plan. He is the structural engineer brought in to salvage the building before the foundation completely collapses. And the showrunners have been explicitly leaned into a concept that sports fans know all too well, the coaching tree. In the history of the Green Lantern Corps, the lineage of Sector 2814 is a straight line of intense psychological friction. Sinestro trained Hal Jordan. Now we see Hal Jordan is now tasked with training John Stewart. Sinestro was widely considered the greatest Green Lantern to ever live before his obsession with absolute power drove him to create the Sinestro Corps. He passed his methods, his intense discipline, and his borderline authoritarian philosophy down to Hal Jordan. Now, Hal is projecting that same exact high pressure, unyielding methodology onto John. If the source code of the mentorship is corrupted by Sinestro's ego, the update Hal is installing in John is inherently dangerous. And this does explain the kinetic friction between Hal and John during the early stages of their partnership. Hal isn't just being a tough drill sergeant because he's arrogant, he's doing it out of sheer terror. Every time John questions authority or relies on rigid military logic, he doesn't just see a rookie, he sees the ghost of Sinestro looking back at him. Hal is hyper aware of how easily a protector can cross the line into becoming a dictator. So he might be trying to build a hero in John while simultaneously fighting off the authoritarian impulse that Sinestro planted in his own mind years ago. And look, showrunner Chris Mundy has emphasized that Hal Jordan in the series is older than the traditional superhero protagonist. He isn't the fresh-faced headshot from the Silver Age. He's a veteran test pilot whose body and mind have taken immense punishment. And for a man whose entire identity is built on being fearless, aging is the ultimate enemy. The arrival of John Stewart, right, younger, highly disciplined, a former Marine sniper with an architect's mind, creates an immediate existential crisis for someone like Hal Jordan. It's the classic narrative of the aged gunslinger realizing the town has hired a newer, faster quick draw. Hal knows he is being phased out, and that realization introduces an emotion he has spent his entire life denying, which is fear. Now, let's look at the logistics of the 2016 incident while we're here, because why would an alien presence manifest in a remote Nebraskan town, though? And why would the Guardians want to completely erase from the history books? Now, what if the entity or killer Hal is tracking in 2016 isn't a random alien criminal, but Sinestro himself executing a rogue operation on Earth? Because look, if Sinestro discovers something buried deep within the planet, perhaps an early manifestation of the emotional entity of fear, and the Guardians covered it up to prevent a panic within the Green Lantern Corps, it explains everything. It explains why the evidence vanished and why Hal is completely untethered from reality and why he is treating a local homicide like an interstellar conspiracy. Think about this. One of the most compelling pieces of narrative lore surrounding this show's early development is the idea that Hal and John may actually have to share a single ring or a single operational power source on Earth during the initial investigation. And from a narrative perspective, I ain't gonna lie, this is kind of genius because a Green Lantern ring runs on willpower, but it also processes the psychological state of the user. And if Hal and John are tethered to the same energy matrix, their minds are essentially linked, right? John is forced to absorb the chaotic, trauma-ridden psychic static of Hal's veteran mind, while Hal is forced to confront the unyielding, rigid morality of John. And this transforms the ring from a weapon into a psychological mirror for them both. Now, as the 2016 storyline reaches its boiling point, the Sinestro situation inevitably escalates beyond the jurisdiction of Earth. Hal is forced off-world, and he has to chase a shadow, and he has to chase that shadow into the deep sectors of the universe, leaving the terrestrial investigation behind. And this is the critical pivot point because Hal's departure isn't a standard deployment, it's an exile. Whether he goes willingly to hunt his former mentor or is reassigned by the Guardians to get him away from the Earth anomaly, it leaves the planet completely reliant on a single protector who has barely finished his orientation. And so when the narrative shifts fully into the 2026 timeline, we are now looking at a completely different John Stewart. The rookie is gone, and in his place is the definitive Green Lantern of Earth. By 2026, John has mastered the ring. He's utilizing his background as an architect to create constructs that aren't just creative, they are structurally perfect. But he is haunted by the ghost of 2016. The case was never truly closed. It was just paused. And John is now the one digging through the old case files, utilizing his methodical, disciplined mind to uncover the truth that broke Hal Jordan 10 years earlier. And this brings us to the centerpiece of the entire theory here. The cold case isn't about a dead body anymore. It's about a missing lantern. And by 2026, Hal Jordan has vanished into the deep cosmos. So now John isn't just solving a mystery to protect the peace. He's trying to find out what happened to his old mentor. So as he pulls the threads of the 2016 incident, he realizes that Hal didn't just lose the case, he got infected by it. Every clue John uncovers points to the fact that Hal's mind was systematically dismantled by an accident, a predatory force. And this is where the true detective influence meets the deep cut lore of Emerald Twilight. In the comics, Parallax isn't just a giant yellow monster, it's a living embodiment of fear itself. It is a It is a parasite that doesn't conquer you from the outside. It finds cracks in your ego and breeds there. And so the best way to think about this is, right, Sinestro's influence leads to age and isolation, which leads to the distrust of the Guardians, which leads to the Parallax infection. And so think about the ingredients that this show is mixing together. You have an aging hero who is terrified of being replaced, isolated from his peers, deeply traumatized by the betrayal of his mentor, and hyper obsessed with a conspiracy that no one believes in. That isn't just a midlife crisis. That is a perfect incubation chamber for Parallax. And the show is showing us the realistic psychological disintegration of Hal Jordan, turning his comic book descent into darkness into a tragic prestige television masterpiece. And so the ultimate thematic contrast of the show rests on the fundamental difference between how these two men view the world, right? Hal Jordan is a test pilot, which means his entire life is based on pushing a machine past its limits until it breaks, relying on pure instinct and reckless willpower to survive the crash. John Stewart, though, is an architect, which means his life is all about calculation, stress points, and load-bearing walls, and ensuring that things survive the storm. And so when the cosmic order begins to splinter, Hal's instincts is to fly directly into the engine fire. John's instinct is to analyze the blueprint and reinforce the structural integrity of the sector. Earth doesn't survive because it has a fearless warrior. It survives because it has a protector who knows how to rebuild from the ruins. And so at its absolute core, Lanterns, I'm looking at it right now as a generational tragedy. It is a story about how the sins of the past are passed down to the future like an inherited illness. And so Sinestro passed his fear and need for control down to Hal under the guise of Hal came terrifyingly close to passing the same toxic high-pressure anxiety down to John. The true climax of the series isn't a battle in an alien with an alien warlord, is John Stewart realizing the systematic rot of the core and choosing to break the chain. He has to become a Green Lantern who doesn't just conquer fear, but understands it well enough to keep it from destroying his humanity. And so I think Lanterns concludes with a massive paradigm shift for the DCU. The 2026 timeline will reveal that Hal Jordan didn't die in the deep black. He was consumed. The investigation into the 2016 murder will lead John straight to the discovery that the yellow impurity has breached the perimeter of Earth and that Hal has become the host for something ancient, hungry, and yellow. John Stewart will be left standing as the sole definitive guardian of Sector 2814, looking up at a universe where his former mentor is now the greatest threat to existence. So the ring that didn't make Hal a hero, it just hid his darkness until it was too late. So, but what do you guys think? Do you guys think that the DCU is setting up Hal Jordan to be our ultimate cosmic villain, or is there still hope for the original Green Lantern? I want to know what you guys like in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the cosmic landscape of Green Lantern lore, make sure to subscribe to this page. We are dissecting every corner of the freaking DCU, from the streets of Gotham to the furthest sectors of the universe, because in this universe, the brightest day always has cast in the darkest shadow. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Stay crispy and peace out.